Hi, this is Pat Johnson, and this is Psych 150. And in this mini lecture, we're going to talk about the bystander effect, which also goes by the name diffusion of responsibility. So you'll hear it by either of those terms. Now, what's a bystander? A bystander is somebody who is around when there is an emergency situation. So the bystander effect is what we can expect of people who are standing around in a group when there is an emergency situation. Diffusion, the word diffusion means to spread out. And what's being spread out? The sense of responsibility, the sense of I am personally responsible, I need to do something. So that sense of responsibility is diffused. The definition that we get from our author is the tendency for any given bystander to be less likely to give aid if other bystanders are present. So again, in an emergency situation, if you are in a group, you are less likely to help than if you were just alone. And there are reasons for that. Let's give some examples. Let's talk about some examples. Years ago in my class, I was giving a test, and just after I had passed out the test, a young pregnant student, young military spouse, she raised her hand and she said, "Mrs. Johnson, I don't feel very well." And I walked over to her, and just as I got up to her, she fainted. And we were in a classroom with really hard floors, so I was trying to get her to the floor, and I yelled over my shoulder, "Somebody help me." And the classroom filled with students, and there were probably about 20 other students in the classroom. And they looked at me, and they looked at the student, and they looked at each other, and they went back to their tests. And I got really angry because nobody was helping me. So I said again, "Hey, I need some help. Somebody help me." And again, they looked at the situation. They looked pretty distressed and upset. They looked at the student, they looked at me, and they looked at each other, but nobody got up to help me. And this is called the bystander effect, or diffusion of responsibility. And when I asked them later, they said, "Well, we thought somebody would help. We were sure that somebody would get up and help you, and somebody needed to help." And when we say somebody needs to help, do you see how that sense of responsibility is diffused or is spread out in the group? A more sinister, and by the way, my student ended up being fine. She had had an allergic reaction. We did get her, or I did get her to the hospital, and she turned out to be fine, and so is the baby. Let's give another example, and this is in your textbook, and this is a classic example. And in the 1960s, a young barmaid by the name of Kitty Genovese was coming home from work late at night. And as she got out of her car in the parking lot of her New York apartment building, a guy came up and he stabbed her, and she screamed, and lights went on in the apartment, and people came to the windows and they were looking, but nobody came to her help. The perpetrator ran away, and then when nobody came out, he came back. He started stabbing Kitty again. Again, lights went on, and nobody was helping, but people were looking. He ran away again. And the third time he came back, he finished her off, and he killed her. And the police were only a couple minutes away, and there were dozens of people who were watching this, and nobody came to Kitty's help. And this was reported as the hatefulness of New Yorkers, that they will not come to their aid of their fellow man. But two researchers by the name of Lantenay and Darley started to think about this, and were wondering if there could be anything in the situation that could cause people to act in this manner. So what they did is they took this into the research laboratory, and they started to research diffusion of responsibility. And what they did was they would make experiments. So one of the experiments that they did was to have somebody in a room alone, and then in the second condition, they were in the room with other people. and they would have smoke come through a duct in the room, an air duct, and they would time the dependent variable would be how long it would take the person to report that there is smoke coming into the room. And they proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that if the person was alone, they would immediately get up and report the smoke. But if there were other people, Confederates, people who were actors in on this study, that the subject would just look at the other people and sit there and not do anything. And Lantenay and Darley changed this up into many different variations and found again and again that the bigger the group, the less likely any one individual is to come to the aid of the victim or to report the emergency situation. So that's the bystander effect, also known as diffusion of responsibility, and you can check out other videos with examples of this topic.